Okay, it's a few minutes after. I imagine people will still be trickling in, but I think this is a good time for us to get started. And let me start by thanking everybody for coming out. We did the best we could to get the information out to people, and it looks like it's working. We had some boots on the ground in a few places handing out flyers, and we took out some ads, and just, word of mouth. So again, you had a million other options for tonight, I'm sure, but thank you for coming here to hear these people talk. And we're going to talk about something that's pretty serious. I have personally, I'm 50-something, and they've been talking about widening the Eisenhower since I was probably a teenager. Well, I think the time is coming from everything I've been able to deduce. There's been a budget to back some planning and some public comment and so on. So I think that from this man's perspective, it might actually happen this time around. So the more people that get their opinion, their voice in on the process, I think the better a chance we all get something we can live with and hopefully be proud of. My name is Stephen Backman, and I'm a board member with Vox. And I should introduce my co-board members. Gloria Backman, my wife, sitting at the table here. Sharon Daly, standing over by the staircase there. And I see other Vox members in the audience. Thank you for your loyalty. I'm only going to spend a couple of minutes on us and then move on to what you all came for. Vox it's our community group here at Forest Park. It's the only one that we have. The name Vox, actually some of you may have known us as Citizens United in Forest Park. We did change the name. We were learning that the term Citizens United had kind of lost its luster after a certain, well anyway, we won't go there. So we changed it to Vox. And Vox is Latin for voice, and the reason we like it is the last letter, the X. The X represents you, me, anybody. It's an unknown variable, and it's our belief that we all are X. So that's the origin of our name. And I'm just gonna just a minute about what our mission actually is. And I just lifted this from the mission statement, so I hope I won't prattle on, it's just a quick sentence. Vox promotes a greater awareness of activities and policies of the local government and matters of public record impacting the citizens of Forest Park. So that's who we are. So anyway, we'll get on with the activities. We're going to have two presentations. The first one will be Peter Harmet from the Illinois Department of Transportation, and he's the gentleman seated furthest away from me. And then also Rick Kuner from Citizens for Appropriate Transportation. He's sitting closest to me. And they are going to give presentations, approximately 20-25 minutes apiece, kind of set up what's actually happening with the project. At the end of that process, we're going to open it up to question and answer. And our process it's pretty typical. We didn't invent it. We stole it from somebody else, I'm sure, years ago. We have you write your questions on 3x5 cards. You may have been offered cards when you came in. There's pencils at the table. Have people to pass out additional cards if necessary. Then we've got a couple of sorters. They're over on the right, Bill and Sharon, and they're going to consolidate questions that are alike, because you tend to run into a lot of that. And we're going to, I can't stress enough that everybody in the room here is an adult, and these questions are about a serious issue, and we're talking about, pretty lofty concepts on where, you know, millions and millions and millions of our taxpayer dollars are going to be spent. So, you know, everybody please be, you know, professional about this. And, you know, no questions like, you know, when did you stop drinking at work and things like that. So really just keep it professional. And please, you know, we're all at a certain age now where we need the cheater glasses. So please write as legibly as you can, print whatever, so that our sorters and then me at the end, I'll be reading the questions on the cards to our panelists. So I think without any further delay, I'd like to introduce again Peter Harmet from Illinois Department of Transportation, and he is going to kick off the outline of the project here tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. One of your options this evening was to watch the World Series, but I know personally I'm a Cubs fan, so I have no interest in watching the Cardinals. It also means I'm an eternal optimist. A little bit about the I-290 study. We kicked off the planning process in the fall of 2009. We're doing an environmental impact statement, the most rigorous form of analysis we can do for a transportation project. Formal agency reviews, certainly the full oversight of the Federal Highway Administration, and really three parts to any transportation study: engineering, environmental, and stakeholder input and coordination. And on the subject of coordination, the overall public involvement process follows our context-sensitive solutions framework, frequent interaction on every issue, and had a lot of interaction over the past 4 years, and certainly more to come. Study area, we started off with the section from Mannheim to essentially Cicero Avenue. Pretty higher crash rate than other places, certainly a higher level of congestion. A lot of concerns there. As we developed alternatives, our study area extended east so that we are adjacent to the circle interchange study limits that we're seeing. So we have a 13-mile corridor from Mannheim to Racine. As I mentioned, stakeholder input's been a very important part of this. We've had 3 rounds of public meetings now. About 18 advisory group meetings with community officials, going through everything from soup to nuts with transportation needs, sketching up alternatives, evaluating alternatives to get us to where we are today. And I'll talk a little bit about alternatives further on in the presentation. A lot of small group meetings, Speakers Bureau, if someone will feed me lunch, I'll do a presentation. Well, I would even do one if you didn't feed me lunch. A project working group I mentioned, community advisory group has been very important as a connection to the communities, as well as all the transit providers and the environmental resource agencies in the region. And really then, the proposals we put together, and here on the aerial photo and things we showed 2 weeks ago, are a reflection of all that stakeholder input. In terms of the planning process, many, many layers to it. Okay, I'm going to be there. Many layers to it, 4 basic steps: collecting information, data collection, so that's not only technical data about traffic and crashes and drainage and community features, it's also about stakeholder input. So we're collecting both of those things to get an understanding of what the transportation needs are and how we should move forward. Developing a summary of the transportation needs at next step, and then developing and evaluating alternatives, and then eventually getting to, at the end, a preferred alternative. So we want to be down to one plan rather than several. Within the alternatives development process, we handed over the Sharpie, the magic marker to people, and Post-it notes, and literally had over 600 different ideas We looked at those, we combined similar ideas, screened out some other ideas like putting a road 60 feet in the air. It would just be an express lane. We kind of screened those out. And so then we got down to 22 what we call single mode ideas. These are pretty solid ideas that are either transit or highway. And part of our purpose was to determine how well these were going to work as standalone improvements. Certainly there was a lot of conversation over the years. If we just extend the blue line, all the problems on the Eisenhower go away. And certainly from a lot of different perspectives, whether it's our studies or other studies done by other agencies during this time frame, it isn't a standalone solution, but it certainly is part of an overall solution. From there, in that round one, then we assembled, bless you, combination mode alternatives. So they've got both highway and transit features, and we're going to layer bike and pedestrian features, which we've now gotten to, and that's what's reflected on the aerials there. And we tested those and looked at how well they address those transportation needs. Again, pretty lengthy kind of preliminary screening step here. A lot of conversation that affected how many alternatives and what kind of alternatives we looked at. And we're down to 4 alternatives that we're going to carry the rest of the way and add details. One of the things that's important to know is on a project like this, the environment is the communities. We're not going to find, we haven't so far found any wetlands, but certainly so the community is the environment, and before we even started the environmental process, we had stakeholders map out what are the environmental constraints. And so what were those? It was the right-of-way line. Let's stay within that existing right-of-way and not impact community features. The other part of it is then, as you get further along, the other environmental issue is noise and air. And we need a fairly high level of engineering detail to analyze noise and air, so we're in that process now. And it's all of this is an iterative process. We do some analysis, have some discussion, go back, do some refinement and some more analysis. So as we go along, if we find new issues, we're going to certainly adjust and address those issues. So the transportation needs probably, don't have to roll out the fainting couch for this, but mobility, safety, and facility condition and design. A lot of congestion out there, a lot of crashes out there. High severity crash locations. It's related to a lot of things, including the design, the layout of the Eisenhower. When the ribbon was cut in 1962, was certainly under an entirely different set of assumptions, particularly with respect to traffic volumes. Upwards of 200,000 vehicles a day out there. It was in the 40s, 45,000 when the facility opened. And certainly another part of it is not good access across bike and pedestrian facilities. Certainly could use improvement and connections between pedestrians and the CTA access. Also a great need. So we're addressing all those things as part of this process. So just, we've got extensive documentation on transportation needs, but I figured you guys didn't want to go through a 500-page report, so I'll just kind of give you the highlights. Just contrasting the western 8 miles and the eastern 4 miles. We've got 6 lanes to the west and 8 lanes to the east. We're way over capacity on the west end, and not as much, but still over capacity on the east end. Still mastering the clicker. Crash frequency, number of crashes per, it's basically crash rate. So it's based on volume and length and all those things, kind of, so you've got an apples to apples comparison here. That western 8 miles, higher crash rate than any of the Chicago area expressways. The eastern 4 miles, crash rate that's more comparable to what's out there today on Kennedy and Edens and the Stevenson. So facility condition and design, that's a pretty easy one to identify. It was built in the 50s and 60s, of overhead clearances, certainly concerns with interchange design, particularly at Harlem and Austin. And as I mentioned, poor connections to transit, those could be a lot better. People running across the street, people running the gauntlet of various obstacles on the sidewalks, whether they be light poles or newspaper kiosks, those kind of things. And just even along the corridor, there isn't sort of any continuous bike and accommodation. So over the process, we've heard a lot of things, certainly concerns about safety and congestion, advocacy from some of the stakeholders on extending the blue line, and we've done extensive studies on that. As I mentioned, the communities are the environment, so staying within the right-of-way footprint, very, very important. A key environmental goal, key design goal that follows that. And in fact, we've accomplished that except for a couple of places at First Avenue and at 25th for the interchange footprint. Otherwise, we stay within what a lot of people call the trench in the Village of Oak Park. I think a lot of people are concerned about whether walls will be moving and buildings come down, but I can tell you that even without a lot of stakeholder input, you could just look at that kind of proposal and say that's not going to go very far. So we were looking at ways to address these needs without those types of community impacts. And certainly improving connections across it as well as along it, and multimodal solutions. In terms of our formal federal environmental process, the mission statement, concise summary of the transportation objectives, transportation needs that you would like to address. It pretty much addresses everything related to transportation. Improve local and regional travel, both of that's going on. Certainly the Eisenhower has through travel, but it also has considerable volume of people that use that to access their communities every day. Improve access to employment, getting people to their jobs. If we can maximize the number of jobs that these improvements would access, that's a good thing, particularly for the reverse commute. There's a need there. Improve safety for everyone. It's not just about cars, it's about people on foot, on a bike, everywhere. And as I mentioned before, those poor connections to transit, let's improve those connections. And that's something we started and something that's going at an even higher level now with the CTA Blue Line Vision Study. And improve facility deficiencies. One of the things, the Eisenhower is a vital artery in our transportation network. And so simply closing it because it's in bad shape, that wouldn't be a feasible option for anyone. And so we have certainly mobility needs and safety needs, but just even addressing congestion or condition, very, very important. So regardless of what alternatives pick, the lion's share of the cost and the work that has to be done is just to reconstruct what we have out there today. Some of our findings in round one, as I was mentioning earlier, it wasn't a standalone transit solution from a mobility standpoint, but again, we've got facility condition needs on the Eisenhower that we have to address regardless of what happens with the Blue Line. Alternatives with an additional lane performed well in comparison. And certainly we saw a need, though, for a combination of transit and highway improvements. We looked at a wide range based on stakeholder comments, and really our charge to look at comprehensive range of different ideas. So we've got ranging from just simply adding a lane and extending the Blue Line to adding a lane, extending the Blue Line, and then somehow managing that lane through carpool or tolling or some combination of the two. We actually went back in round number 2, which we just wrapped up this summer. We went back and looked at alternatives. What if we didn't add capacity to the Eisenhower but put tolling on there? Would that put more people on transit? Yes, but it put even more people on the arterial network. So the tolling issue, sensitive all on its own, but certainly it's going to work a lot better in combination with adding capacity to the Eisenhower. So just to describe the alternatives that are on the table at this point in the study process, we call them the draft environmental impact statement alternatives because they will be carried the rest of the way into that formal document as well as our public hearing. So the first one is called GP lane, GP add lane. GP stands for general purpose. So it's just a plain old lane. Don't have to be in a carpool, no tolling involved. Just creates a continuous 4-lane in each direction section between Mannheim and Racine. Blue line extension, either as bus or rail, is part of this alternative as well as the other ones, as well as a very robust connecting network of bus service. We want to make the blue line extension the best it can be, so we want to bring people to it, as well as then have an extension of express bus service off the west end of the blue line so that it has a greater reach. Next alternative is HOV, high occupancy vehicle, and 2+ means you have to have 2 people in the car to ride in the lane, so we would add the lane between Mannheim and Austin, and then restrike the inside lanes from Austin to Racine. And certainly technology and enforcement are going to be a key part of this or any other managed lane. Make sure people just don't have a beach ball with a hat on it next to them. And then we get into managing flow a little bit different way. Again, we add the lane, we have the blue line extension and the supporting bus service. And, but then we have what's called a hot lane, high occupancy toll lane. So if you've got 3 people or you're a transit user, you ride in the lane for free. Everybody else would pay a toll to use that lane. And again, we would restripe and reconfigure the inside lanes between Austin and Racine. Then the last alternative is, again, that hot lane concept, but tolling all the lanes. And again, with adding capacity, we still get, although it is less, a net positive on the arterial congestion side, but certainly just adding a plain old general purpose lane is what brings the most traffic off of arterials. And so this is a way to manage traffic flow, but it's also, as you might expect, it's also a potential revenue source for reconstruction of projects. So I think we have a very broad range, a lot of stakeholder comments about various alternatives, and this reflects both the technical work and the stakeholder input. So then kind of looking at it overall, in the 6-lane section, we're talking about alignment shifts and things that would cause us to need to reconstruct that section for sure, as well as all the overhead structures and interchanges. To the east, we may be restriping or doing nothing at all to the mainline pavement. So that's not determined to be a certain that we reconstruct that pavement, but certainly all the overhead structures, we have fewer crash problems and we have fewer capacity problems. But they're in the same boat in terms of the design. It's an older design. So even if it isn't any kind of additional turning lanes or anything like that, better connections to the CTA should be incorporated into those overhead structures, as well as better bike and ped amenities along. And we're going to be studying the overhead bridges. There's some 20 bridges between Cicero and Racine that we're also going to be examining. And as I mentioned, we had been doing a lot of planning work with respect to potential blue line extension, but we worked with the CTA to figure out what the best role what other role they'd like to have in the study. And last year, we came to the conclusion that they'd like to do a blue line vision study, so they're sharing resources with us. So it's a long-term vision at a conceptual level of detail. How are stations located? How are they configured? And they're going to look at some near-term things as well as some long-term things. With the opening of the red line, I think this piece of the blue line will have the greatest number of slow zones. So they've got some near-term things they want to tackle, but the longer term, what does this corridor need to be? Does it need an express track? Or should CTA consider using that available space for wider platforms, because I think it's 12 to 15-foot platforms, and the modern standard is 24, 26-foot platforms. We're also going to be working with them on what possibilities exist with the freight right-of-way. CSX doesn't have as much business now. That Canadian National took their business out to the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern corridor. So you see a lot of trains being stored there. They certainly have some local deliveries, but conversations we've had with them, there is some right-of-way available. I would probably add the caveat for the right price as well. I don't think they'll just hand it over, but we are studying alternatives that would look at what if we reconfigure that space so that we can use some of the space for the Eisenhower, closest to the Eisenhower, there's some CTA right away there, and then have the CTA expand into unused CSX right away. So that analysis is ongoing, and we should be able to report out on some of our findings on that this winter. And I think first and foremost, the results of this, we're running in parallel, and they're joining in on our major public involvement events like our public meetings and our advisory group meetings. And we will fold the results of this study into our environmental impact statement. So this has got to get done before we can go to a public hearing. And the focus is the existing blue line. They see that as really a pressing need compared to an extension, but certainly they're going to work closely with us, as are all the transit agencies, on what exactly this corridor should be to the west. We'll have a footprint for it. As part of the highway project, we will have a corridor so that either bus service or rail can just be dropped right in there without having to rebuild bridges and so forth. So we're doing some coordinated planning. We had our third round of public meetings downtown Chicago, and then out here at the Math and Science Academy on the 7th and 8th of October. We actually have a comment period that's going on. We actually extended it at the request of the Village of Oak Park, so comments go out till, at least for the public meeting record. We'll consider and review comments at any time, but for the public meeting record, November 7th would be the date that you need to submit it by. And we've got the information from the public meetings on our website as well, EisenhowerExpressway.com. And it was our typical format, which is PowerPoint presentation, exhibits on display, and then we did a Q&A session at 6 p.m. in both locations. So some of the next steps, we've been really in an extended period of really talking about concepts and modeling concepts way up at 30,000, 40,000 feet. We're in a position now to start adding that engineering detail, which is going to give more form to these alternatives and allow us to then analyze noise and air in particular. We'll be continuing to meet with agencies and communities, especially as we develop what we call the geometry, that plan view, profile, cross sections. And so that'll be ongoing, but then we'd like to come back to one of our major public involvement milestones, which is the advisory group meetings. We'll do that. We're looking in the December timeframe, but we also have extended our public comment period, so we may need more time to get ready for that meeting. But we'll report out on the findings and responses to the public meeting number 3 comments, as well as to start talking some depth about the geometric design. And ultimately what we're aiming for is to have coordination to a level of completion that we could prepare and circulate a draft environmental impact statement. That's just a report that summarizes all the work we've been doing since the beginning. Shouldn't be any new information in there for folks because we've been sharing it along the way. And have a public hearing again with these 4 alternatives. And then after that hearing, consider public comments, look at the technical information to make a determination on what should be the preferred alternative, and then we do a final environmental impact statement. We don't have funding beyond just doing the planning, but we are going to be doing a project financial plan to identify potential sources of funding. I think if you're just looking at it right now, certainly some of it needs to be done in stages because the overhead bridges need to be reconfigured so that they could be wide enough for that blue light extension as well as an additional lane of some sort. So we'll be looking at those things as well as we get closer to that issue, even things like construction impacts. But certainly we seem to be, from a planning perspective, have a lot of conversation in front of us before we can talk about construction impacts. Then we'd like to wrap up planning end of 2014. I think technically fall goes to December 22nd, it's the equinox. So the solstice, whichever that is. Well, I'll ask you later. But then, the next phase would be contract plan preparation, which would be typically 2 years to do, as well as those little pieces of right-of-way we're talking about. So the soonest we'd be in position to build anything would be 2016. But again, that's if all things go quite smoothly. So I think I took less than 25 minutes, so I shall yield my time to Rick.
Excuse me, Peter, before, one thing I noticed that was missing, and you're not be prepared for it, is we share, in Forest Park, we share Harlem Avenue with Oak Park. I know at other presentations there was some information put forth about moving the lanes out to the right side and so on. We're going to have that's going to impact us here, west of Harlem Avenue. If that's something you have with you or could be addressed, if you need a minute, you can come back to it. I don't want to put you too much on the spot.
No. I might have Circle Bridge in my backyard. Because they're talking about reducing
I can start there, and then they're on either side.
which means that'll extend the foot.
So a little bit about left side ramp.
It's already there.
At the project level, we
The
have
mayor has made the suggestion to them.
Collected a lot of crash information, and we see knots of crashes. The highest rate of crashes in the westbound direction is approaching Austin Boulevard interchange. Another knot of crashes in the westbound direction approaching Harlem. And there's multiple things going on, including the lane drop there. But in general, to put it in lay terms, the inside lane in terms of driver expectations is for longer distance travel, and rather than the interruptions with getting on and off at an interchange. And certainly you see it on a daily basis. People zoom down that inside lane approaching Austin and then cut over. And so not everybody says, sure, come on in. Sometimes they don't let them in, or kind of.
I like the woody.
So just even the way it's configured up top, oncoming traffic turning at the same time into each other, lack of pedestrian facilities, but certainly well understood that some sort of diamond interchange or something like that would not be an appropriate fit for that surrounding community, and Village of Oak Park making very clear that whatever it is, the intersections stay in the middle. So we had to work with those ideas, and we'd come up with a concept where the ramps are on the outside and then move in to the inside. And
So you see a portion of that here. I'll go to the next slide, but you see them on the outside. And then really what this also does is allow a larger portion of the expressway to be covered. And even the opportunity for a continuous path along the Eisenhower, even with going under Austin Boulevard as well as under Harlem. And we've actually, that's shown on the exhibit there. We're also part of the vision study looking at ways that we can make those connections to the CTA better, make that whole pedestrian experience much better, and even sort of the grander vision, depending on feasibility and cost participation and coordination with the railroads, there could be some sort of transit-oriented neighborhood, commercial, at these crossings, but a lot of work to be done on that, but certainly we feel like this is a good starting point for discussion. Perhaps there's CTA access on both sides of Austin so that you don't have to run across the street. Maybe bus pullouts. Other safety features, modernized traffic signals. I think at one of the interchanges, it might be Austin, you've got to reach through the fence to push the pedestrian push button. It's not an optimal situation. So countdown timers, push buttons, pedestrian safety islands. The science of that at a national level, Federal Highways has gathered 10 years of before and after data, very extensive studies. And what they've seen is in the before and after scenario, this pedestrian safety can be improved by over 50% just by adding one of those islands. Because one of the worst situations where people are caught out in traffic, standing on a yellow line or something like that, this offers a refuge. Now, it's not meant for people to go there and just simply camp. We want to time the signal so people can make it all the way across. But if they can't, they have an option. This is kind of looking at it lengthwise. I'll be on the outside, then come in to the middle. It certainly offers an opportunity to improve connections across there. One of the things about how the existing interchange operates today is the worst thing is they have traffic backing all the way up onto the Eisenhower. So those lights are timed in such a way that it keeps draining the Eisenhower. But what happens then is then you're waiting on Harlem because all that green time is really a priority on the Eisenhower. And what this design also would do from a traffic flow perspective is balance that out more so that with these longer ramps, vehicles can store on there without concern that it's going to back up onto the expressway. And better turning lanes and separating those turn movements so that people aren't kind of eyeballing each other as they make those movements. So a lot of features to address those conditions. So if we look at a cross section, this is east of Harlem. You see the existing ramp perched up on those concrete walls in the middle. In this area in particular, again, what you're looking at is this is the intersection up top, and it is covering over the expressway. We're also able to shift the expressway a little bit south. We have some room without touching CTA to shift that south, so we're going to move it away. One of the things, just to give an example of what today's conditions are, Eisenhower on the main line has 200,000 or so vehicles a day. Ramp has about 10 to 15,000 vehicles. So one of the key things in our noise analysis and our air quality analysis is to look at, are we making that trade-off where, although there may be a ramp or an intersection that's elevated, does that lower level of traffic, what does that mean? There's still going to be traffic, but what does that mean in terms of air quality, in terms of traffic noise? Because essentially what's going to happen with those ramps on the right side is they'll shield a whole section of the main line as well as the noise coming from CTA to some extent. So that's very important. As I mentioned, this is an iterative process, so find some things out about noise and air, and if we've got to make adjustments to design, we certainly will. And even absent that, if there are other suggestions out there that we need to be looking at, we certainly will. Does that cover the left side, Rich?
I think so, thank you.
Okay. I will yield the rest of my time.
Okay.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. Can you all hear me in the back, Jamil?
Yes.
You can hear? Okay, good, thank you. My name is Rick Kuner. I am by profession transportation planner, have been for quite a number of years. Some of you may know that I was an elected village official, village trustee in Oak Park. I have the distinction of being elected on April 1st, which, as everyone knows, is April Fool's Day. I was never smart enough to figure out the significance of what all that meant, but my assumption is it did have some fairly important significance. What IDOT is proposing here is a once in a 50 or 60 year opportunity. This is not a resurfacing project. This is not maintain the bridge or repaint the bridges. This is basically a rebuild. And that shouldn't happen more than once every 50 or 60 years. So this is a pretty big deal. I'm here as a representative of Citizens for Appropriate Transportation, which is a citizens group with a website, and there's a one-page handout that's available at the side, and I've got someone up here with our website on it. We're also up on Facebook as well, and I should tell you that we are all volunteers. It'd be nice if you didn't question our sanity in terms of what you're doing, but if you do, if you could just keep those thoughts to yourself, that would help. I have these 5 topics that I want to cover in my presentation. The transportation corridor, local streets, neighborhood impacts, the environmental impact statement, and some concluding comments. And I propose to do that within the 20 to 25 minutes that I've been allocated. The corridor itself is multimodal, and for some reason that term multimodal throws people, especially newspaper reporters. So by multimodal I mean 3 separate modes of transportation. And the 3 modes that are in the corridor now are the Expressway, the CTA Blue Line, and the CSX Freight Railroad tracks. That's the Expressway from Des Plaines Avenue looking west. It's 6 lanes here in this section that I'm showing you. As Pete suggested, IDOT wants to take that from 6 lanes to 8 lanes. That would mean some loss of the landscaping that's there, but more importantly, it will bring noise and air pollution closer to some residential neighborhoods. You can see here, again, from the circle interchange looking towards Harlem, it's got a residential neighborhood here, basically along Weaver Street, and that extends all the way over to at least Des Plaines. So that's a neighborhood that would be affected on the north, and the park on the south would be affected, the dog park would be affected, and the VFW playground would be affected. This chart is showing you a 24-hour day. So each day has 24 hours. All of these are to the year 2040. Jamil, can you still hear me in the back? If I talk without the mic? Okay, thank you. So this is what's called the no-build alternative. In English, what that means is if we don't make the improvements that IDOT is suggesting, what would happen in the year 2040? And what this says is there are now 17 hours of congestion a day on a weekday. IDOT estimates that 17 would go to 18 hours. These are the 4 build alternatives that Pete described. General purpose means general purpose lanes, same kind of lanes we have there now. The EXP means express bus service, basically PACE, and high capacity transit means either an extension of the Blue Line to Mannheim Road or bus rapid transit. So you can see the best of these alternatives in terms of hours of congestion is the high occupancy vehicle with 2 or more in the vehicle, which would reduce the 17 hours a day now or 18 hours a day in 2040 by 45 minutes. The other 3 build alternatives would not do as well. So we're talking about spending a very large amount of money to rebuild the Expressway for some fairly limited improvements. The CTA Blue Line stops at Forest Park, and I'm sure all of you already know that. Transit planners make a distinction between what they call captive riders and choice riders. A captive rider is someone who is transit dependent, does not have access to a car. Kid's not old enough to drive, 2 drivers in the household, but just 1 car. So in my case, I have the car tonight, my wife is homebound. I won't hear about that, I'll hear about other things at home, but she knows where I am tonight, and all of you are witnesses, so. Seniors that don't drive, high school kids that aren't old enough to drive or can't afford a car. People graduating college these days frequently have debt, so they're postponing buying cars. So there are those kinds of issues as well. We're also looking at the possibility of different construction schedules for IDOT and the CTA. And that's because CTA gets money from different sources, different funding sources than IDOT does. This extension of the Blue Line, as Pete suggested, is not a high priority for CTA. They are helping IDOT, and I'm sure that help is appreciated. So we run the possibility of rebuilding the Expressway and not extending the Blue Line for quite a number of years thereafter. Whether that happens or not, I can't tell you, but at least that's a concern that's out there. This graph shows you...
Hey, Rick. It's definitely better with the mic.
Thank you. Is this better? Okay. This graph shows you the month-by-month ridership for the O'Hare branch of the Blue Line and the Forest Park branch. So there's 3 branches on the Blue Line: the O'Hare branch, the Dearborn Subway, and the Forest Park branch. Ideally, from a transit perspective, these 2 are roughly equal. You look at the graph and they're clearly not equal. O'Hare is got far more riders. So what dictates the number of trains is the O'Hare branch. What that means for the Forest Park branch is we're getting better service than this ridership would show. I'm not complaining about that, you understand, but that's something that the CTA will be concerned about. So the point here is there's some unused capacity on the Forest Park branch. What that means from a multimodal perspective or from an expressway perspective is the more people that you can get to transit or divert to transit, the better the expressway will work. More than 60% of the crashes that Pete talked about on the Eisenhower are rear-end crashes, and they tend to happen when you've got distracted drivers driving into the sun. Alcohol and drugs are an issue at times. So with fewer cars on the expressway, and I'm not talking about much of a shift, roughly 10% would be enough to make a very big difference in the way that the expressway works. This is the Harlem station on the CTA. And you can see that it's almost at grade level. The street in front is Lemur. So unlike Oak Park, where the expressway is either a full level below grade at Austin or roughly a half level below grade at Harlem, the expressway is coming up as it comes into Forest Park. Forest Park station is the terminal station. The CTA has said that the yard is in bad shape. It is constrained, so they would be looking to either reconfigure it or ideally move it further west. That then presents some opportunity here in Forest Park that you ought at least consider. And you've got a comprehensive plan, and Carrie's here tonight, so she'll hear this, and although she already knows it, that's something you ought to take into consideration as part of your comprehensive plan. CSX serves the candy factory to the tune of about 2 trains a week. They basically are bringing in more sugar than any of us collectively in a lifetime are going to consume, no matter how much candy and cookies that you eat. It's just an enormous amount of sugar. The rest of the tracks are not used. I would invite you to play transportation planner the next time you walk across Harlem or Des Plaines or Circle Avenue and look at the tops of the tracks of the railroad. If you look at the tops of the tracks for the CTA, they're silver or gray in color. And as we all know, steel tracks rust. When you run trains on them, they don't rust. If you look at the 3 tracks on the CSX, the southern one is not badly rusted because of the sugar trains. The 2 northern ones do have rust on top, and that means that they're not running trains on there frequently. Pete earlier said there's an opportunity to talk to CSX. I don't envy anybody that has to negotiate with railroads. I've done that a couple of times. I went through Barry Park as one of the village trustees. I went through Freight Yard when I worked in Boston, where there were trees growing up in the middle of the tracks. And so we said, could we acquire this freight yard and put a community college there? And with an absolutely straight face, the railroad said, no, we need them. So we showed them the picture with the trees coming through. We're talking about 12, 15-foot trees. And we said, when's the last time you actually ran trains down here? And with a straight face, they said, well, we did it in World War II. We may need to do it again someday. Not easy to do. By the way, if you visit Charlestown, Massachusetts, the Bunker Hill Community College has been there since the late 60s doing just fine, thank you. And there are 2 freight tracks on the edge of the community college, so it can be done. For local streets, those cars on the right are southbound on Harlem. They are not parked the way they look to be. They are waiting to turn right to go out west on the Eisenhower Expressway. This was taken around 8:05, 8:10 a.m. in the morning in August, and you can see that they're backed up. If you look north, you can see that on the left-hand side of the screen, the southbound traffic is backed up almost as far as Madison. So there are clearly some traffic issues on local streets. Circle Avenue Bridge, and you're going to tell me the building on the right has almost been demolished, and I know that. But the candy factory is on the left. That bridge has got too steep a hill for people to see traffic coming in opposite directions. It's got access to the western end of the CTA station. The sidewalks are too narrow to meet the Americans with Disability Act. So those are issues that IDOT needs to address, and I'm not telling them anything they don't already know, they have already identified. Neighborhood impacts are critical because you all live here and we all live next door to you. All right, so this is an aerial photograph. The CTA station is here. Altenheim is up here. Jackson Boulevard, the dog park, playground, the big park. So this neighborhood here is clearly basically from Harlem all the way out to Des Plaines Avenue, is affected by air and noise and traffic impacts from the Eisenhower Expressway. What frustrates me at times with IDOT is they tend to have a true transportation focus. And if you are the Department of Transportation, it's appropriate to have a transportation focus, but the truth is transportation and land use are like that. If you make major changes in transportation, you need to expect major impacts and major changes in land use. Similarly, if you make major changes in land use, then the transportation planners need to adjust for that and account for that. This is a shot that I took in 2010. You'll see that the right-hand lane is closed because at that point IDOT was resurfacing it. But my intent is to show you that the residential grade and the expressway grade are relatively close to each other. If you take what's 6 lanes there and push it up to 8 lanes, which is what IDOT is talking about, you need to account for what impact that's going to have on the residential land uses. That's Elgin Avenue, looking north from Leamore. Got the community garden. This is Harlem Avenue, right here. Community garden and the Expressway is in the foreground, just off the picture. And you've got what I've heard referred to as the park, or the big park. This is the noise wall that IDOT built in Bellwood as part of the Hillside Strangler improvement. One of the issues you're going to need to deal with is how you feel about noise walls. There's a balloting process, and Pete can explain that better than I can if that comes up during the question and answer period. The walls would look better with more landscaping, and in some communities they've been able to put sculpture on the noise walls. Arizona has Indian motifs built into their noise walls. Southwest Indian's not an appropriate motif for here, but there's those kinds of possibilities. This is a house in Westchester with a noise wall. Look at the scale of the house, look at the scale of the noise wall, and look at the fact that there's a street. Anytime there's an opening in a noise wall, it's not containing the noise, and every time you've got a street that's crossing the Eisenhower, you need to have an opening. There's some construction mitigation issues as well as long-term issues you need to deal with, and I've listed them here. Air pollution, you already know the most important thing you need to know about it, which is breathing polluted air is bad for your health. We are a non-attainment for fine particulates, and so that's an issue that IDOT has started to address, and as Pete said, that analysis is still in progress. Noise, by definition, is unwanted sound. That's sometimes subjective. If you're a big opera fan or rock and roll fan, that's not noise to you, that's beautiful music. If you're not a rock and roll fan or an opera fan, or take your pick, jazz or blues, whatever, then that's welcome sound, not unwanted noise. Staging area is also going to be an issue where they stage their equipment. That will last for the construction period. Pete gave a rough estimate and proviso of 3 years construction, and I'm sure he would tell you that's still rough because they don't have final engineering plans yet. Okay, environmental impact statement, also known as an EIS. In general terms, it does two things. It recommends a preferred alternative. So given the 4 build alternatives and any variations that will arise in round 3, which is the one that's preferred, which is the one they're going to recommend. And the second major thing it does is identify mitigation measures. NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act, and NEPA philosophy for mitigation or negative environmental impacts has 3 steps. Step 1 is avoid the negative impact if it's at all possible. Step 2 is, if you can't avoid it, minimize it. And step 3 is, if you can't avoid or minimize it, then mitigate it. And for your protection, as well as IDOT's protection, the EIS includes mitigation measures that they are committed to. Pete referred to the EIS as the most rigorous of the environmental requirements. I would normally say it's the most comprehensive, but we're basically in agreement of the 3 environmental analysis choices. This is the one that's most comprehensive, most rigorous, most analytical. It comes with 5 legal protections. Chapter 1 in an environmental impact statement is obligated in a concise manner to explain the purpose of the project and the needs that the project is intended to meet. The second legal protection is IDOT's required to consider all prudent and feasible alternatives. So if you or I or anyone else can think of a prudent and feasible alternative that IDOT did not consider, we don't have a legal obligation, but we ought to inform IDOT that we think they've missed one. If in fact they have missed one, then technically they're in violation of the law. This is civil law I'm talking about, not criminal law. But they've got a requirement to consider all proven and feasible alternatives. Thirdly, they're required to do a rigorous analysis of all the impacts. So air, noise, environmental justice, flooding, wetlands, traffic, land use, zoning, neighborhood impacts, indirect impacts. There's a huge, big, long list. Fourth legal protection is they're required to do a comprehensive and fair evaluation. And the final legal requirement is meaningful citizen participation. They welcome comments, they have some obligation to respond to them. You may not like their answer, but that's their prerogative. They do have an obligation to deal with it. I've got 5 concluding comments. I think we're not seeing the best alternatives from IDOT. Pete has suggested that they're willing to revise them as appropriate. I think that's something that needs to be done. Second comment I would make is we need to strengthen the residential neighborhoods. Land use and transportation are 2 sides of one coin. They're integrated together. Third comment is to protect the kids. There's been some articles in the Forest Park Review about traffic on Jackson, and it's especially in the vicinity of Garfield School. That's an issue during construction. That will certainly be an issue. And in days when there is inclement weather or snow and people divert off the I-Jackson and Washington and Madison and Lake Street are places that they go to. Fourth, we need to deal with the long-term impacts as well as the construction impacts. And finally, the point that I made at the beginning, but I'll make it in different terms now, these are long-term significant quality of impacts. These are not, we're going to disturb you for a day or two. These are, we're going to change the way things function for the next 60 years. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Both of you covered a lot of territory, and we appreciate that. I was a little remiss in my duties at the beginning. We did invite the CTA to be here tonight to discuss the near and the long-term plans, and they were unable to make it. They were shorthanded. I dealt with one of the project managers, Janine Farson, and she expressed her regrets and just said they can't fit it in. So I think in summary, both these gentlemen pointed out there's a near-term goals and long-term goals. The near-term, obviously make these, all the platforms and whatnot, more pedestrian-friendly and ADA accessible and so on. And the long-term is pushing it to Mannheim Road. I know that we fielded a number of questions leading up to this because we had made ourselves available through email and telephone. And that was, a lot of people were optimistic that that might be happening with this first volley, this first attempt at modifying the corridor. That is long-term, and as the gentleman here explained, they get their money from different places, and apparently it's not a priority with the people that are supplying them with funding. So that said, we will proceed now with the question and answer. And does anybody need more cards? Okay, we've got, do we have more cards there? Okay, all right. Oh, I spot 2 people in the audience. It's kind of a tradition here when we see our local elected officials. I just want to point them out, and I'm grateful that these elected officials are here, showing that they have some interest in what's going on, as well as we do. So, first of all, over here, Frank Mott, if you want to raise your hand, thank you. Frank is on our District 91 school board, and I saw Chris Harris walk in. He's one of our village council members, and I spotted him when he came in. So those are the only ones that I'm missing. Anybody? I don't think so. Okay. So anyway, we will proceed with the question and answer part. So let me see what we've got.
I have no idea. I didn't see it.
I'm sorry, we need to circulate and pick up some of these cards. Who has cards that are filled out? Okay. Just raise your hand if you have a card. Our people will come out
And collect them. Okay, Sharon had mentioned that these have to do with property, and in some case residential property. So I'll start with the first one. What residents between 25th Avenue and 17th Avenue likely be impacted or removed to make way for the extension of lanes on I-290? So I guess that Sharon said there were other questions about property, so maybe a re-emphasis on the eastern part of this change, and then specifically 17th and 25th Avenue, more to the west.
We've got the aerials over here. The answer is there will be no residential displacements. We need a little bit of right-of-way at the northeast quadrant at First Avenue and the Eisenhower, so that's Eisenhower Tower, a little bit of parking lot there. And then at 25th, we need property in the southwest quadrant. There's currently an unused school, an empty school, and we've been working with District 88 on the possibilities in that area. So, and maybe it leads to us refining our design to pull back our footprint, or they would desire that get purchased and they have some other use for it.
This is a good one here. Can eminent domain be used to acquire the CSX right-of-way? To both of you.
I would have to look into that. I know that the railroads are pretty much here before IDOT was, so they have some very strong foundation to work off of. So.
I don't know the definitive answer to that, so I'm in the same ballpark that Pete is. I would tell you railroad law goes back to the late 1800s, and we've come a long way since then, but they still use that law to their advantage.
I will say, though, that we've been coordinating with CSX, and so, I mean, I think in any case, we'd like to have a mutually satisfactory outcome, no matter how you look at this. So they have identified that there could be some right-of-way available. We are looking at also how we could perhaps improve their clearances as well by lowering their tracks, and maybe also flattening out those bridges. So that work's ongoing. So I would hope we would just come to an agreement on something and move forward.
Okay. Our question analysts over there, they kind of consolidated some people's questions into kind of a general kind of cover everything. So you may not hear your specific question. It may have been mixed in with others to make it a little bit more clear. To be able to service many questions in a clear fashion. Can significantly widened bridges be considered a given in the I-290 planning? And would this include bus turnarounds, bike crossings, parks, and, it looks like parks, park and rides, Okay.
we've actually had multiple workshops on non-motorized travel in the corridor. Most recently, I believe it was at our June advisory group meeting. And so what we reflected in the drawings, the concepts that we showed at the public meetings that are here on the table, is in areas where we've got existing on-road bike lanes or planned ones, as well as then sidewalks that meet today's standards. We propose those ideas, but again, it's kind of a conversation starter. I think as we move forward here, we're really looking for more detailed examination of these ideas to see what else is out there or what adjustments we need to make. In terms of park and ride, particularly for the Blue Line extension, the west end there, we're working with the communities on around the Mannheim Road area, what would be a suitable park and ride location and at least an initial stopping point for the Blue Line. So we're considering those as well. And trying to find ways to make access to the existing park and ride here in Forest Park more accessible.
As a bare minimum, the sidewalks don't meet the requirements of the Americans with Disability Act, so they would have to be widened. At least the station that I use most often, which is Oak Park Avenue, the CTA puts out big black garbage bags along the sidewalk, so it's already too narrow, and that makes it narrow. Planning philosophy these days would say the more pedestrian access that you have, the more bicycle access that you have, the better. My recollection is that the CTA says about 60-some-odd% of the folks that use the Forest Park Branch Blue Line walk, so a pedestrian-friendly environment is all to the good. So I think I'm complimenting what Pete said. Without anything else they can do to better that is all to the good.
New York City, Milwaukee, San Francisco, they've all deconstructed obsolete urban expressways. Was the conversion to a boulevard properly analyzed?
As I remember, the expressway that was gotten rid of in Milwaukee was not a link between two places. It was more of a spur line. So I think that wasn't a real big hit on the system. I have to go back and check, but that's what I recall from that situation. But we have 200,000 vehicles a day, so at-grade crossings, those kind of things just wouldn't work. Especially if we're looking at about a 13-mile stretch that's part of a whole network. So the kind of traffic volumes we're looking at, just existing, that wouldn't be something that would be a workable solution.
Pedestrians who wish to cross the expressway to Harlem Avenue have a hard time doing so safely. Will this be improved in our new plan?
Yes. I can go back to the drawing if you wish. Some of the features with this concept include wider sidewalks, larger landing areas, and safety islands, modernized traffic control equipment, countdown timers and push buttons that you don't have to reach through the fence on. And we're still examining and evaluating. We had bus pullouts on both sides with this twin station concept, but does that make sense? Because it's making the crossing, making it more convenient for people to connect to CTA by bus, but making the crossing wider. So we're looking at that, as well as the design vehicle, what size vehicle, looking at that even more closely. There is a standard so far as what you should design it for, but we're also looking at then the usage and if we can tighten up things based on the actual predominant usage there. One thing we don't want to do is set it up the way it is today where trucks are trying to make those turns and going into the oncoming lanes. That's not a good thing either. So we're trying to find that balance.
How much higher, steeper, will the Harlem Bridge be to accommodate the right-hand exits? If not steeper, then longer?
We're still working on the geometry, but it basically be one level up from the Eisenhower, but we're looking at lowering the Eisenhower. So, we could be lower than the existing intersection grade that's out there today. So that's more work we're doing right now. And the other part of it is that these ramps only swing in for a portion of the length. And I'm going to walk over to the map again. So what you see is it's starting on the outside, and then there's another portion of that starts to swing in toward the middle of the road. So not a continuous wall, if you will, along there. And again, I think a key analysis here coming up is what's the effect of essentially shielding all that mainline traffic from the residents? Do we get a noise benefit? Do we get an air quality benefit? It's a key question for all of us.
The ramps, I think, are one of the major concerns. It may be the most major concern, but it is certainly a major concern. As Pete said earlier, in the 50s when the Ike was designed, they were looking at 100,000 vehicles a day. Now we're running 180,000, 200,000 vehicles a day. So, and the design standards are more stringent today than they were back in the 1950s. From a traffic point of view, the ramps need to get longer. And there's also a section, let me try it differently. If you're going to design an expressway, there are 3 geometric parts you need to consider. The through lanes, 12-foot through lanes. Secondly, the weaving sections to either merge or diverge onto an intersection. And then thirdly, the ramps. And the ramps can be a whole variety of configurations, and we see a variety of configurations in the Eisenhower. So given that the volume is roughly double what it was intended to be when it was designed, those ramps appear, again from these aerials, to be longer and higher. The air pollution issue is in part what are known as fine particulates, which are very fine grain that don't have a very wide dispersion path but have some diversion. The best explanation for it I can give you in layman's terms is a woman at one of the public meetings a number of years ago who lives along the Eisenhower, and she said, after breakfast I wipe down the refrigerator and I wipe down the kitchen table, and then I go to work. And when I come home from work, I need to wipe down the refrigerator and wipe down the refrigerator again because of the fine particulates. That was the good news. The bad news is every one of us has a nose that filters out some sorts of pollutants. The fine particulates are too fine, too small for the filter within your nose and my nose, no disrespect intended here, to filter out those particulates. So that's a concern. They don't have a very wide dispersion path. What happens is that they get pushed out in the air, and there's what's called gravitational settling. Gravity pulls them down. But if you live along the expressway, you're looking at wiping down your refrigerator, washing your lawn furniture more often, being a little more reluctant to open your windows during the summer. I mean, it's those kinds of impacts to be concerned about. So the major point I'm making here is that the ramps are still a big deal. We have not seen drawings to scale yet. We've seen these kinds of drawings, which are very helpful in understanding and visualizing it, but at some point we need to see engineering drawings, and IDOT is committed to do those. There's no battle about whether they should or not. They in fact will harm it.
Okay, the next question. This one's for IDOT. Could you please explain how much reduction in pollution due to the reduced how much reduction in pollution due to reduced traffic congestion?
That's a key part of our analysis that's ongoing right now. We need some pretty good design information to analyze air quality, need horizontal alignment, vertical alignment, design traffic. I think to give you just another frame of reference on the Circle Interchange project that's started up construction now, those improvements over the no-build condition are going to reduce CO2 emission by 40,000 metric tons. So there are things that can happen with improving travel flow, but certainly it's a key question on the Eisenhower that we need to work on and discuss with you all.
Could you put some perspective on 40,000 metric tons compared to what? I mean, is it a percentage, or can you give a percentage of what the money's going to drop?
I can't give that same prediction for the Eisenhower. I'm just making the point that capacity improvements in congested situations can yield those types of benefits.
Funding transit improvements. The four alternatives. I'm sorry, the four alternatives, I guess that earned or entered into round 3 of the IDOT's EIS result in no improvements or reduced bus train ridership. If current transit ridership is approximately 25% of trips in this corridor, what percentage of reconstruction dollars? I don't know, can somebody, will be allocated to the transit versus roads? Would you like me to, I'm going to read that again. Okay, I think I got the hang of this one. Okay, funding transit improvements. The four alternatives that earned round 3 of IDOT's EIS result in no improvements or reduced bus train ridership. If current transit ridership is approximately 25% of trips in this corridor, what percentage of the reconstruction dollars will be allocated to the transit versus roads?
Well, first, I could address the overall question of transit funding in the Illinois Jobs Now capital bill. Billions of dollars for transit initiatives, whether it was high-speed rail, leveraging those resources, or transit statewide and in the city of Chicago. So the state of Illinois has a huge commitment to transit, hundreds of millions of going toward CTA, Metro, and PACE type improvements. In terms of what gets funded where, certainly part of the vision study process is to come out with a proposal and look for joint funding opportunities. If by the time we're finished with the planning process, Washington has programs, just to give you as an example, that move a multimodal project to the head of the funding line, then we've got the project for that. So we'll continue to work on that. And it's important to also note that it doesn't necessarily have to be a rail type extension to begin with. Certainly we can connect it up with a dedicated bus service, somewhat similar to what we're doing on I-55, that is PACE is running bus on shoulder down to the medical campus. Great success. They want to expand service. We're actually looking at converting that to a more heavily used, even managed lane. So a lot of things to be explored, a lot of questions yet to be answered, but we certainly have a lot of input and a lot of ideas.
Okay, this question is 2 parts. How will construction impact our sewer system? We already flood during heavy rains. And how would construction affect our property values and taxes?
In terms of drainage, one of the things we want to do in the short term is replace the pump station at the Des Plaines River with a higher capacity, more modern system. We'll be looking very closely at drainage as part of this next step here. And certainly part of our coordination is to ask those questions where there are existing drainage problems, where we can collaborate with villages on improvements or the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. They've done a lot of planning in this area. Certainly Addison Creek is a concern. The Eisenhower does not drain to Addison Creek. It goes down to the Des Plaines River. But that is also part of the overall analysis. And property values, we have an existing situation. We haven't seen data that says it swings either way because of a highway improvement or not a highway improvement. Certainly there is an existing situation today with idling traffic and safety issues and poorly designed access at various places, whether it's 25th, or 1st Avenue, Harlem, or Austin. So improving travel flow and in doing so, addressing noise and air could be the makings of improving generally livability of that corridor just by addressing those issues. They're having an impact today.
I'm going to ignore the drainage question because I'm not an engineer and there are very capable engineers here. I would say that if I lived near the Eisenhower Expressway, I would be quite concerned about my property values in terms of what impact noise walls might have on them, air, noise, view. My wife is a gardener, so she'd be concerned about sun access and whether she had to change sun plants to shade plants or something like that. The studies are mixed as to what impact they have. I don't have any better crystal ball than anyone else, but I would be concerned if I were a property owner close to the expressway.
Okay, the IDOT proposals recommend ramps 2 to 3 stories high running along Harrison Street. This will bring pollution into the neighborhood and impact community cohesion. I guess they're referring to the ramps. Has IDOT studied lowering the expressway? And how can we stop this happening to our community?
We are indeed studying lowering the expressway, and we're here for a lot of reasons. Among them, there's a situation today in terms of safety, congestion. The Eisenhower doesn't serve any of its customers very well, whether you're someone that's trying to access transit, someone who's trying to cross it. So we're trying to find ways to address those issues and make that an asset for the community. And that's why we seek input at every stage of this thing.
Elimination of, let me start over, excuse me. Elimination of the Ferrera-Pan rail spur would drastically increase truck tanker traffic on Harrison Street directly in front of the park. Will the lack of a rail spur cause Ferrera-Pan to leave Forest Park?
We're not proposing to eliminate any of that connection. Our conversations with the CSX is that they need a spur track as well as another track. So there is space available, but it still assumes that corridor is still functioning and making those deliveries to Ferrera-Pan.
The original I-290 design included wiggles between 17th Avenue and Harlem to calm traffic at 70 miles per hour. How does this plan remove those psychological restraints?
I am unfamiliar with wiggles. We do have certainly some issues between First Avenue and 25th with weaving and merging and short distances between on and off. So we want to make First Avenue a more comfortable place for people to get on and off. That's where they should be. Through traffic shouldn't be going down 9th or 17th necessarily, at least not truck traffic. So we're looking at configuring that access and having the frontage roads reclaimed by the communities for their local use, and improving access at 25th and 1st in particular. We are looking at whether, regardless of the alternative, having this a smart corridor, if you will, where we could dynamically manage the lanes, whether it's speed limits or for the hot lane options, toll rates, things like that. So we're looking at ways to manage that flow, because part of it, going through the corridor, and part of it's because of the bottleneck issue, is that there's a lot of speed differential that leads to crashes as well.
Eastbound First Avenue ramp is being considered for reconstruction. Traffic signal stays on a lot longer going north-south on First Avenue. Light on exit ramp may not last more than 1 minute, causing an extreme backup on the First Avenue ramp. So it sounds like signal timing and whatnot.
Well, we're beyond signal timing at First Avenue. It's called a split phase, where you're going to let one direction go, say northbound. Well, actually, it's southbound, I think, goes first, and then northbound, because there isn't a left turn lane there for people to sit and make their turn, and even enough room for that turn lane. So with some of the concepts we've been looking at, we want to put together an interchange form that is much more efficient, that lets people make those turns simultaneously, and reduces some of the backup that comes back from that interchange. So it's a design that maybe under a lower traffic volume scenario was just fine. 50 years ago maybe it was just fine, but it certainly has its problems today.
IDOT has a really slick visual simulation model for traffic, where you can plug in any traffic volume you want on any expressway design volume that you want. You can plug in accidents and see the impact. We've seen that a couple of times. It's not yet in any of the reports, but it is a fairly useful visualization tool for trying to get a handle on it. The advantage of a computer model like that is you can try out all kinds of alternatives without actually building them. In a sense, you build them in the computer model and let the computer analyze what kind of backups exist and how bad they would be. So I would continue to urge IDOT to use that. They had that model running as one of the exhibits at Proviso. Like I say, it's not in the reports yet, but it is something that can help answer those kinds of questions.
Please define congestion. What is the average miles per hour, average time through the corridor? Where are the new points of congestion? Where are the new points of congestion further east and west? And what is congestion rate today and projection with the additional lane?
We measure congestion a lot of different ways, and we use that simulation model at our public meeting a couple weeks ago. Essentially what, I guess to measure it in a couple of different ways, essentially what these alternatives do is move up to 40,000 more people through the corridor, cars, people. And so that's equivalent almost to the population of Oak Park. Oak Park's about 50,000. So more people coming through. You look at the value of people's time, travel time savings adds up to about $700,000 a day. We're also, the way this process works is we don't simply look at what design eliminates congestion as we know it. There's always a context to every project. This is not a greenfield project in a rural area. It is a densely developed area. And so we wouldn't even try to draw up some huge cross-section that gets us to level of service C. It's a balance of all those factors, and certainly what's going to be telling this process is what happens with air quality in particular, improving traffic flow versus not improving it.
Peter's right that there are several ways of measuring congestion, and the question identified some of them. Miles per hour, average travel speed is one. How much time it takes you is a second way. Travel time reliability is something that is an issue. And by that I mean if you really need to get to work at 9 o'clock, you allow the time it takes you to get there, and then you put in some extra time as kind of a safety margin or buffer time to make sure that you get there for your meeting or for your doctor's appointment or drop the child off at child care, any of those kinds of things. There's also this notion of level of service that Pete referred to. The level of service basically runs A, B, C, D, E, and F. And if that sounds like the kind of grades that were available in your college courses, that's the analogy. So level of service E and F is basically failing level of service. IDOT's policy, I think, is level of service D or better during the PM peak hour. And it's the PM peak hour because tends to be higher volume than the morning rush hour than the AM peak hour. So there are those variety of ways of measuring congestion.
Okay, this question is titled Diversion onto Local Streets. Won't tolls make more people stop taking the Ike and drive through Forest Park and Oak Park neighborhoods?
We've actually examined that issue two different ways. Stakeholders suggested, what if we put tolls on I-290 without widening it? We found that that had a significant impact on local arterials. On the other hand, with various tolling strategies and adding capacity, that tends to balance that out. Certainly just adding a general purpose lane has the biggest benefit to local arterials. And then at the other end of the spectrum, that alternative that tolls all the lanes has the least amount of benefit, but the key is adding that capacity at the same time.
Diversion of traffic to local streets is a major concern, and it happens. The models are certainly a decent way to start to estimate what will happen. Some of the things to bear in mind, though, is that when you do a capacity analysis, and by capacity I mean flow rates on either transit or the roadway system, the underlying assumption is clear weather. We all live in this climate, so we know that assumption is at times not very good. When the Ike is backed up for accident or snow or something like that, we see additional traffic on Jackson, on Roselle, on Madison, somewhat on Lake Street. So that is a concern. The national studies on managed lanes, especially those that charge tolls, suggest people use them roughly 2.5 times a week. So there is what's called toll aversion, or people trying to avoid paying tolls, especially since the Ike now is an issue. Managed lanes are hard to manage. The good news is the computer technology is good enough to give you information in real time, so you can adjust the tolls, and if you jack the tolls way up, you're going to get a lot of diversion. If the tolls are minimal, not. There are also some equity issues as to whether you can afford tolls or not, and how frequently you're going to be willing to pay them.
Can Pete talk about the build alternative congestion prediction in 2040?
Yes, he can. The figures I was giving you earlier were 2040 numbers. So it's 40,000 more people through the corridor. That's assuming year 2040. Something also to bear in mind is this is a highly urbanized corridor. And so with an existing facility, even with widening it, you're not talking about stimulating all kinds of new development because development is spoken for in this area. So we're going to see modest changes in traffic. And for those increases in traffic from what we've seen so far, it's going to be coming off the arterial system because some have said that Jackson Boulevard is the fourth lane in each direction already. And certainly there's been measures taken to try to calm traffic there. But people are still making those types of choices because they're avoiding the Eisenhower. It's a long distance trip. I think we'd all want that on the Eisenhower rather than the local arterials.
Okay, we are running into a problem where we're running out of our time allotment in this facility, so I'm going to ask, I'm not going to get to every single question here, but I'm going to, I'll do what I can with the lightning round. Okay, that sounds good. All right. As creative, I'm going to actually kind of shortcut this a little bit. Our creative financing ideas being pursued for the CTA expansion, can they partner with green agencies? Are there other green solutions such as a bike path, solar powered panels along the northern wall is a reason to have the walls, I assume? And are there possible new noise abatement solutions?
Funding is a very important issue, and I know CTA has been very interested in whatever creative funding is out there, as well as joint funding solutions. So we'll continue to examine that issue. In terms of noise walls, certainly what we built 10 years ago to the west is not the state of the practice today. And we're going to be looking at whatever those latest technologies are. And it certainly, this isn't just a technical exercise. This is very much community oriented so far as what's desired. And I mean, just even getting to the point where we'd say, yes, there is a noise impact and this type size of wall would be needed to address that impact, and this is what it would get. As Rick had mentioned earlier, there's a balloting process where affected property owners would still have to sign on to that. And so there is a whole coordination process that's going to happen just on that issue. And more of it would happen in the next phase in final design, but we want a lot of good ideas with the communities before we even get to a public hearing or a draft EIS.
This may be a quickie. Who is building the CTA stations, IDOT or the CTA?
There's actually some very intriguing possibilities because if IDOT comes in and rebuilds the interchange, we're going to be affecting a whole layer of that infrastructure. So some of these interchange improvements where there is CTA access, the IDOT improvement could leverage the CTA improvement. So I give you an example, Peoria Street down at UIC. We're working directly shoulder to shoulder with CTA on some improvements we're going to make as well as some improvements they're going to make.
Okay, and these last two are, I think, are going to be very informational. What advice do you have for the public regarding the next steps that they can take on these issues. You talked about a window of time extended to November 8th for input. Does that include anybody at this point?
Yes, it includes anybody, and it's for the purposes of summarizing everything we've heard at public meeting number 3. We will always gather in comments and consider those. I think if you have questions, we're here to answer them, not just here, but at my desk all day long, whenever. So the main thing, my advice would be to seek information about this study. If you have neighbors or friends who don't know about this, ask them to contact us. If you have suggestions and ideas, bring those to us. That's all part of this process. So my advice in general would be, if you have an interest in this, participate.
I basically agree with what Pete said. I would add that Citizens for Appropriate Transportation has a website. It's on the handout. Membership in CAT is free, so you can afford it. We also have a contact link on the homepage, so you can email us. And we have a Facebook group, and you can join that group as well from the homepage of the website. CAT's primary mission is to educate people about these issues. And so the more people that know about it, the better. So anything you can do to send emails or letters to IDOT is good. Talk to your elected officials, send forward emails to your neighbors. Spread the word any way that's at all reasonable.
Okay, and this last one is an announcement. I suspect a number of people here have heard about the next IDOT CTA informational session. State Senator Don Harmet, some of you may or may not know him. He's organized both IDOT and CTA to meet at Gwendolyn Brooks Middle School in Oak Park on Tuesday, October 30th. So if you need to, okay, October 29th. Thank you for the correction. At 7 p.m. So if you're just not getting enough tonight, get more. Actually, take advantage, if you're particularly concerned about the CTA, I did see the presentation at Proviso Math and Science Academy, and the rep did have information to offer, certainly about the vision project, and had a few candid statements about what to expect on getting it out to Mannheim. So maybe some answers can get, some things can get answered there. Oh, 7:30. Uh-oh, okay, well, person that,
Penalty for coming early.
yeah, that's right. Well, you can help set up chairs or something. So anyway, that might be a good opportunity to hear from the CTA. All right, well, I guess that, I almost forgot our traditional prize here. These are our gift bags for our participants. There is plenty of Ferrara Pan, our local delights, in these bags. So I'm not responsible for the sugar buzz at the IDOT office tomorrow. And Rick, you've got plenty here. Thank both of you for coming out tonight and speaking to us. And on behalf of Vox, we just are thrilled that we could give you a little more education tonight about processes that are affecting us. So everybody have a good evening. Thank you so much for coming, and travel safely.